Welcome back to Creator Commons, where we talk to creative people about their creative processes. I'm your host, Andrew Mack, and today I'm interviewing Henry Wallace. So, Henry, tell us a little bit about yourself to get started.
There's a lot of places that I could start from. But I guess for today, I'll talk about the film side of me. I am a media production major at High Point. I've been studying this for about 4 years, and it's been really a creative process. My background originates in theater. So a lot of the ways that I approach acting, I approach talking with actors, I approach directing, I approach cinematography, it stems from that theater background, which really is, I think, a really fun approach to take it, and it makes it feel very improvised, very fluid, and it's just a fun process overall.
Yeah, for sure. That's something that's really unique in our school. We get a lot of people who start off in photography or music. Rarely do we get people coming in from the acting side of things. So let's kind of jump in. You started to address what I want to talk about on the podcast. So when addressing your talent, what things do you do personally to make sure that you get an authentic performance without sending them to a negative place or bringing up past trauma that wouldn't be healthy for them?
A great question. I like to think about, there's a book that I read once, In Respect for Acting by Uta Hagen, which I hope I'm not mispronouncing that name. Kind of helped me think about, it's much more for theater directing and theater acting, but it really helped me approach directing from a different aspect. And one of the things they mentioned a lot in their book was, when directing, never directly tell an actor a specific emotion, because what you're doing is you're putting them in a box. Well, if I'm reading a script and it says, person A, Sally, talks to Dennis and says, this relationship is over, I'm leaving. Don't look at your actor and go, okay, I need you to cry here. Okay, I need you to be sad here. Because contextually, your script should be good enough, and the way you build your scene before then should be strong enough where the actor is able to grasp those feelings already. So the way that you direct is, I think personally, is helping an actor get to the scenario themselves. I think a good director is a support rather than a lead, because your actors are really talented and you want to be in an environment in which you're letting them do their job. There's a lot of directors who come in and I think put their actors in a box and really force them to, fit what the director wants and not necessarily what the scene needs, which I think is really important.
And there's the big difference between actors and directors. Directors are trained to direct, organize, while actors, that is their sole job, is to bring an experience off of a page into real life. So I think that is massive, that you would approach it from an actor-centric point of view rather than, I'm the director, I'm the boss, I'm in charge.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really important. It's a very famous acting technique, Meisner, which is, if memory serves me correctly, accept everything, reject nothing. And the idea is basically putting yourself in an environment that is based off of something but not 100% real, but it has pieces of the realness. So then you can pull from what's real in an environment that's not. And through things like Meisner and through things like what I talked about earlier, it's all about trust. That's what I think where directing really comes in. It's trusting, it's handing your actors ingredients through the script, through side notes you're having, through the set design you're able to put in, through costume designing, through makeup, through lighting, through all these different aspects that you can involve your actors in, and letting them be the characters in which you have written for them to be.
So that kind of brings up a conversation about, I know a lot of us have experienced trauma, and oftentimes actors, when they have to go to darker places, which tends to be a lot of the stories that at this indie level we end up telling, how do you help them, number one, not stay in that dark place, have resources so that they can reach out, and, because some of them do it on their own and you can't really prevent that, but how do you best enable your actors to maintain their mental health and be able to pull on trauma if they need to?
I think that's the challenge. I think it really is a challenge, and the hardest part as a director is that really is on the actor, because I can't tell an actor where to pull their sources from. And I especially don't want to, because it needs to be a healthy environment. Because if you pull from something that is not healthy for you, then that is really terrible for an actor's mental health. So I think it's really important that as a director, if you're doing a particular scene, like for right now, for example, a lot of our actors that we are pulling on for our video shoots are volunteers. They're not paid actors. So for this, we make a clear distinction. We're going to be like, if you want to be part of the short film and we're going over these types of themes, we're letting it very clear that this is what we're doing. And I mean, you would, if they're paid, I mean, like there's conversations that are being had, obviously, but it's being very clear with, this is what this script is going to involve. And then for each character, there's things of like, okay, this character might have this sort of related thing to this particular, like, hey, this conversation is about some sort of death in a family, maybe, for example. And so you like lay that out, so then your auditionees can see that and go, okay, I can do this. And then during the process, you communicate with them pretty early on. After you, probably somewhere in the script reading stage, you can communicate with your actors and be like, hey, just want to double check, is this okay? Like, is this an area you can get into? And if they say it's okay to move forward, and if they say no, they can't, then I think it's also on the responsibility of the director to realize that and, find another person, because you don't want to force someone into something that is either you don't want to force someone into something that isn't A, genuine, or B, hurts them, because you never want to be in either of those shoes. So I think it's just a branch off of that trust and communication, and it's a lot of it, I feel, is during the pre-production process, but as you're shooting and as you're doing things, just checking in with your actors. Sometimes on sets, I remember shooting a short film for a class once that was a creepy, horror film about someone who lives alone, and their ex, basically, who they thought was really creepy, they broke up with, they learn that their ex has been living in their house. And it's the slow realization of everything. And so during this, keeping in touch with the actors, talking with them during this process, and, making sure that there wasn't anything that was going on that was triggering anything in their past, because I didn't want them to, be halfway through a shoot and then realize, oh my God, this is something I can't deal with. And then that, then it starts to hinder progress, and then it starts to hinder themselves, and you want to avoid that when you can. So I just think it's a constant conversation. But on the other side of the coin, and this is nothing, negative to any actors, you also have to be direct. And if there's an actor who's like, I don't know, maybe, but probably not, you have to, there's moments you have to hedge your bets, and you have to be like, I don't want to push you, I don't want to do this, so I have to find a replacement. Because I've also seen that happen, not even necessarily with trauma-related things, but just actors who maybe can't hit a certain thing because it's just not in their range or not in their character, and being okay with, I think we need to look around a little more.
Absolutely. I think, at least at this point, I struggle really with like finding resources, and I mean, human capital is like is one of the hardest things to come by. Like getting bodies in the room to do what you need to do can be really, really difficult. But I think that being willing to look and put in the work and, not risk somebody's safety and not risk your production halfway through makes a whole lot more sense. Yeah.
For sure.
Let's move on to our second question. Can you kind of give us the difference, at least at this stage? I know you and me are working with a lot of realistically non-actors for stuff. What differences and how can you work with non-actors to get a better performance?
That's a good question. I think I don't think it's treating them differently, because when you are put in front of a camera, you are an actor. But I think it's people with experience, because there's certain references and things that you can do that people with more experiences are gonna pick up faster. They're gonna understand certain cues better. I think as a director, don't be afraid to be a little more handholdy with I wouldn't say non-actors. I would say first-time actors. is, again, part of it is also the trust. But I think you can be a little more clear. I like to think about actions as not necessarily emotional cues, but as physical cues. Because for me, I think a lot of really good acting and solid acting first starts with the physicality. Like, for example, if your character needs to be like an old man or something, if you are to be an old man, you have to think about the different stages of how that old man is going to walk, how they're going to breathe. Maybe they have some chest problems. Do they have a slight movement in their hand? Do their eyes twitch? Do they lean one way or the other? And that starts to affect voice, and that starts to affect character. And I think that's how you can also help with emotions and things out of character. Context. That's a huge thing for this. Of if you have a character who, for example, is trying to figure out what to do with their love life, and they're stuck between I like person A and I like person B. Instead of maybe telling that actor, okay, well, I need you to be distraught, be in love, be whatever. Because in that moment, you think about if you were in that shoes, you would have 6, 10 different emotions going on at once. You'd be angry at yourself for not being able to choose. You would be happy a little that you have options and that there's people that in your life that love you. You have jealousy of one person or another. You have confusion. And so there's all these different things. And that's why I think giving one emotion is not helpful, especially for a newer person, because a newer person especially is going to ignore the other 3. So I like to think about it like scenarios, and think about like, imagine yourself as this. Or if you know the person, relate to something in their life that you think could have a good emotional connection. Like I knew somebody who I worked at the film set who was really into sports. And so instead of trying to make a connection to the emotional scene he was in of.
So, as we wrap up the podcast today, I wanted to give a little overview of what we learned. I think it's really interesting, the points Henry brought up as directing being more of an assisting role to your actors. Obviously, you're in charge, but you're still assisting and serving your actors to get the best possible performance and not dictating everything. I think it's a really, really unique approach because I know a lot of young directors will tend to give direct input and tell their actors what they need to do, when in reality, most of these directors aren't actually even trained in acting, so they don't really know what they're doing. So I think that's really interesting, and I think that's a great takeaway from all the directors or anybody working with talent, whether that be photographers working with models or whatever else. We have our first listener question of the week, and this is a really interesting one. So I was asked, when you walk into a space as a videographer or someone who has to photograph or video the space, how do you determine whether it's a space that's going to work, what kind of modifications you're going to need? So I think that really comes down to, first of all, the idea and the plan. So if you have a plan that aligns with the space, then it makes it very easy. If you have a plan that doesn't fully align with the space, but there's some key aspects that still work, you probably still want to use that space. So, and this really hurts or is a really difficult part of documentary or an opportunity where you're following someone with a camera and have less control over a space. Basically, what you're looking for as a videographer or photographer stepping into a location is, where is the light? How strong is the light? Is the sun going to affect it? Where are the overhead lights? Are there outlets? So mostly it's about power and lighting, because the rest of it you can kind of figure out. You want to check if a space is too echoey if you're recording audio in there, but you can also work around that. There are ways to modify things so that you don't run into any issues. But the more you have to modify a space, the more expensive it will be to work in that space. So you want to keep that in mind when you're doing it. Do you have any social media you want to plug? Anything, any way people can find you?
Ooh, yeah. So I have my Instagram, H_Wallace75. I just post stuff regularly on there. I don't really post too often, but I do around there. I have stuff on my LinkedIn, chatting around. And the other thing is Cappy Park. It's a game I'm working on. It's really awesome. So I feel like I gotta plug that in there.
Oh, of course. Please, I mean, I hope Henry would be cool if people hear this and they have more questions about this type of stuff. He loves to talk about this, so clearly.
Oh yeah. I mean, I could spend forever talking about this topic, and I think it's really important to discuss these things and have conversations about these things, because if you put yourself inside a box and all you do is what you learn in class, then you're losing out on a lot of knowledge.
For sure, for sure. I always encourage people to be learning outside of the classroom. You guys know where you can find me, AMAC Photo on Instagram. Thank you for listening, and go in peace.
Bye.